Okay, pals, let's dive into the Understanding by Design lesson plan format. This is part one. I've broken up the discussion of the lesson planning format into a variety of parts, mostly because there's limited time in these chats. So part one is going to deal with the desired results section, and even then, only a part of that. So, the chapter you read from Wiggins and McTighe on Understanding by Design provided an overview of their model of lesson planning and development. I've been using it for the past few semesters, and with the help of students and teachers, we've modified it for use in our program. We found there were elements of their model that were kind of confusing, or where the distinctions between one field and another were vague, so students felt it was repetitive. Also, there are some elements that we value in our program that didn't seem to be as significant to the designers of this lesson planning format. So the format we will use in methods, and the one you will be required to use throughout your time as an EED student, including student teaching, is the one you will be looking at here. The only exception is if when you are student teaching, the school or the class or the teacher has a preferred lesson planning format. And because there is a ton of information in the slideshows and my chats about Understanding by Design, I will also upload these slides to Blackboard under course materials. The drawback is you won't get my comments and you won't get my mellifluous tones, but you will get the essentials that are on the slides. This word is WYTIWYG, and it's from Kelly Gallagher, and it means what you test is what you get. And this is in his book, Read Aside, which we will look at in 402. Rather than seeing testing as the enemy, Gallagher sensibly argues that if a test is a good one, then we should teach to it. But most tests are shit, and that's the problem. It's simple. If you teach students content and you teach it well, then you can expect them to perform on assessments that measure their understanding of that content. If you don't teach it, you have no right to test it. Indeed, to test students on what you have not taught is patently unfair. Understanding by Design is a backwards planning model, so that while we typically think of tests as coming at the end of instruction, backwards planning says start from the test. Figure out what your students need to know, figure out how you're going to assess if they know that, and then teach them the skills that will allow them to succeed on the assessment, which is testing the skills that you have decided were important to teach. So it seems counterintuitive to start at the end, but in reality, it's the smart way to plan. Now, the Understanding by Design lesson plan model, UbD, has three sections or three stages: the desired results, the assessments, and the learning plan. And we'll look at all three. Although, as I say, some elements of the plan have been modified, the content is pretty much the same as what Wiggins and McTighe include. So if you're still fuzzy after all of my chatting, go back to that chapter. I have a former student named Matt Seymour, and he was a brilliant lesson planner, and he still is. He teaches in Fort Collins. Anyway, he offered this advice to his fellow students. As you start the planning process, keep the chapter handy and look back at it to get explanations of sections if things are confusing. Now, we've also added a header to the lesson plan, but we'll do that last. We're going to start with the desired results, and that's stage one of this model. There are 4 sections under the desired results. The first is establish goals, which are the ends of this lesson based on factors such as the state, local, or district standards that you are required to address as a teacher. So for our purposes, you're going to lift the established goals right off of the Colorado Academic Standards. Essential questions indicate the kind of provocative inquiry that will foster critical understanding and transfer of learning. Remember our discussion about understanding and knowledge. Students' understandings indicate the big ideas of the lesson and ultimately of the unit. And the students will be able to section. Those are the objectives, the tasks that students should be able to complete as a result of what they learn in this lesson or this unit. And remember, those have to be measurable. So you're going to think really hard about the verbs that you use to indicate how you will assess mastery of these learning objectives. Now, as I say, for established goals, it's simple. We'll use the Colorado Academic Standards, which are based on the Common Core state standards. The key to this section is making sure what you say you are teaching, you actually do teach. That's why planning is recursive. You start with a sense of your goals and you develop your lesson. Then you go back at the end and see what goals you didn't address that you said you would in this section, or what goals you did address in the actual lesson that are not listed here. So even if you fill out the established goals at the beginning of planning, that's not the last time you're going to look at them. At the end of your entire unit of lesson plan, you're going to go back and ensure that you've said what you were going to do and you did what you said you were going to do. You planned your work and worked your plan. The essential question field is the one that I think we in English Ed modify most. Our version of the lesson plan identifies global and content essential questions. And let me tell you what we mean. Although content essential questions are second in the little space there, we're going to start with them first. And here we're thinking about the big topics and the core concepts in our discipline in English Language Arts. And if you look at the Colorado Academic Standards, you'll see that they make these kinds of questions very clear. Indeed, you will discover that the Understanding by Design model and the Common Core state standards fit hand in glove. Peanut butter and jelly, beer and peanuts. Anyway, you get my point. The reason for this connection is obvious. The creators of the Common Core state standards were aware of the backwards planning model and the Understanding by Design model and the notions that inform that model undergird those standards. So, the content essential questions focus on skills or strategies that are part and parcel of English Language Arts, and they are attentive not just to knowing skills and concepts, but to applying them both in school and in real-world literacy situations. In terms of content essential questions, you can see that the new Colorado Academic Standards refer to inquiry questions in the Reading, Writing, and Communicating Standards. Now, whereas inquiry questions connect to a particular grade and content focus, I think of essential questions in content as cutting across grades. They're more universal, questions that can be considered at all grade levels when we're talking about English Language Arts. The difference is the degrees of complexity. Okay, so when you're thinking about creating your essential questions, take a look at the inquiry questions and think about them as they would span English Language Arts across grades, not just at the specific grade you are looking at the moment. Essential questions are different from many of the questions teachers typically ask students in class. The most commonly asked question is the factual question, a question that seeks a correct answer. I call them the, quote, find a nut in my pocket question, although I have no idea where that term came from, and it could be problematic. Anyway, such questions are clearly not essential in the sense discussed above, or that I just talked about. Rather, they're what we might call teacherly questions, a question essential to a teacher who wants students to know an important answer. Anyway, here's a video. I want you to look at this video. Click it. I don't know whether you can paste the thing in. It doesn't really need any explanation, except maybe this. The questions asked in this video are not essential content questions. Go watch the video. I'll wait for you to come back. If content essential questions look to the big ideas from English Language Arts that you are addressing in the lesson, global essential questions look beyond the lesson and beyond the content area. See, I'm really big on global essential questions, and here I'm thinking broadly. Questions not related to a particular class, but rather those big questions that are related to life, whatever the fuck that is. We are talking about the kinds of questions any intellectually engaged thinking person might ponder. So I'm going to give you a link to another video, and I want you to watch it. This video has explicit language and content, and my point by showing it is this. Big questions don't emerge out of classrooms only. They are not the domain of the highly educated or of the rich or of the successful. We all ask them in a variety of ways. In this excerpt from the brilliant series The Wire, minor drug dealer D'Angelo Barksdale tries to get his clockers, or his little runners, his little baby drug dealers, to think about being a little nicer to their customers, to treat them like human beings. He sees them be nasty and advises them, the game ain't got to be played like that, yo. And I really think it's a significant example of essential questions in the most surprising of places. That we have a separate field for global essential questions is a testimony to the ethos that guides our program. We believe, and you should believe, that what we are doing is far more than teaching English language arts content. We are, as the students last semester asserted vigorously, teaching fucking students. The students in our classroom are fragile souls. We need to prepare them for far more than the reading, writing, and communicating standards. There's a big-ass world out there, and our job is helping them to make their way in it. Therefore, think of global essential questions as those important questions that crop out throughout one's life. These are broad in scope and timeless by nature. They can be, they are, they have been asked for centuries. They're perpetually arguable. The answers are never fixed. They change with the times. Questions like, what is justice? What is beauty? Is the dominant culture the only culture? Are we our brother's keepers? What makes one choose to act or fail to act? Even if we arrive at answers or understandings, we learn quickly that these are provisional only. We are liable and likely to change our minds in response to reflection and experience concerning such questions as we go through life. These changes of mind are not only expected, but beneficial. A good education is grounded in such essential questions, even if we sometimes lose sight of them while focusing on content mastery. The big idea questions signal that education is not just learning the answer, but knowing about how to learn and ultimately how to live. When writing essential questions of either type, there are some general ideas to keep in mind. First, they can't be answered with a simple yes or no. They have no right answer. So you're thinking of open-ended as opposed to closed-ended questions. Plus, they must be made explicit. Students need to know that they are not only thinking about content, but thinking beyond content. And they're thinking beyond content applied to a particular lesson. So write them on the board. Discuss them with students at the beginning of a unit and at the beginning of a lesson. They need to understand what it is you're trying to teach them and how it's relevant to them. And that's why we want them to be engaging and provocative, and we want to use language that they can understand. Talk to them in their terms about what you're trying to accomplish with your instruction. And limit them to 2, 3, 4. Don't go beyond 5 essential questions in a unit. How much can you really get them thinking about deeply? You want to choose questions that connect to the students' lives, to their past, to whatever future expectations they have. And here's the key, and this is why we backwards plan. The essential questions are the basis for your curriculum. The activities and materials that you teach should be selected on the basis of how they help students explore the essential questions of the unit. Therefore, they have to be an integral part of the assessments. By placing global and content essential questions in the same field, we remind ourselves that global questions emerge from inquiries within a discipline. Think of some of them from your study of English or literature. Literature theory is the way we often address them. What are the essential questions behind race, class, or gender theory and criticism? There are both content questions and larger questions of power and domination. In our new teaching grammar text, which I love, the introduction talks about how propriety in language is used as a tool for domination. Thus, grammar instruction raises both content and global essential questions. In other words, there are content-specific essential questions that enable students to think about classroom content and issues in the world beyond the classroom. Every subject area has these two types of essential question. Actively exploring such questions allows students to build their understanding of their content knowledge and develop content area skills. At the same time, they begin to connect such school-based skills to the larger world that awaits them. These final two fields are what we'll talk about in our next chat, and that'll be 1B.